Hi there. I have a question for you. What would you do if you went on holiday with your pregnant temperamental stepsister, a frustrated writer with anger issues, a narcissist, and your married fiance who has been disowned by his wealthy father and has spent most of his relationship with you hiding from his creditors? Well, you'd probably write Frankenstein. Now, this video is the first in a series about the people and events that inspired Mary Shelley to put pen to paper and create her masterpiece, Frankenstein. Now, each of the people involved in this had fascinating stories in their own right, so I figured it was only the right thing to do to give each one of them their own video. So if you like the idea of a series, please let me know in the comments below. Now, our Gothic saga begins with a geological event like no other in recorded history. It takes place along the Ring of Fire, which is a 24,000-mile span around the Pacific Ocean, stretching in a horseshoe-like curve from New Zealand to the tip of South America, and home to over 450 volcanoes, including Japan's Mount Fuji, South America's Andes Mountains, and Mount St. Helens in Washington State. In 1815, Mount Tambora, located on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa, blew its top. Columns of smoke, fire, and ash shot miles into the air. Now, the VEI, which is the Volcanic Explosivity Index, only goes to 8. Now, Mount Tambora, being an overachiever, went to 7, which made it not only one of the largest volcanic eruptions in history, but a super colossal eruption. And thankfully, this only happens every 500 to 1,000 years. But you can imagine, if you happen to be alive when one of these things goes off, well, it's got to be kind of terrifying. Now, the eruption was so loud that it was heard 1,200 miles away. People thought they were hearing cannon fire, but what they were hearing was, in fact, the eruption of Mount Tambora. Now, the volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide that shot into the stratosphere was so thick that it blocked the sun and decreased the global temperature by 3 degrees Celsius. Now, this caused some pretty catastrophic consequences throughout the northern hemisphere. Crops were failing, there was no potable water, there was food riots, famine, and disease. Places like New York and Maine saw snow and frost in June and July. And India was plagued by monsoons and cholera, and Ireland suffered a potato famine and outbreaks of typhus. And as you know, cholera and typhus, well, they're not just going to stay in one place. They too decided to travel around the world. Now, it's also been argued that the change in climate that brought heavy clouds and rain were responsible for Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. Now, I'm not a historian or a military expert, but if you've got some thoughts about this, let me know below. Now, at least 10,000 people died almost immediately after the eruption of Mount Tambora. Some were caught in the pyroclastic flow, which as it came down the side of Mount Tambora was at sometimes going at a rate of 100 miles an hour. And, well, I don't know anybody who can outrun that. And a lot of people were also suffocated or buried underneath the ash. And worldwide, due to the consequences from the climate change, over 100,000 people died in the aftermath. Now, the misery didn't end in 1815. It continued on into 1816, which was a year of cold, incessant rain, and also known as the year without a summer. However, as so often is the case, out of chaos came some creativity. Artworks by William Turner and Caspar David Friedrich painted years, maybe even decades after the explosion of Mount Tambora, depicted these surreal sunsets, which are the result of the sun reflecting off the ash. Now, the skies in these paintings aren't artistic license. This is what they actually saw. And another example of this would be Edvard Munch's The Scream. Those violent colors in the sky are reflections from the ash from the explosion of Krakatoa 10 years before. So that gives you an idea how long this stuff is hanging around in the atmosphere. Now, I experienced something similar, and it wasn't due to a volcanic eruption. Smoke from the recent Canadian wildfires had made its way down to the area of the States where I live. And I happened to notice one day that the sun was a pretty funky shade of red. And I had no idea what was going on, but I did have Google. And so I was quickly able to find out that it was the smoke that was blocking the shorter light waves, and only the longer light waves were getting through, which was giving the sun that red color. Now, in 1816, they didn't have Google, and they didn't have the science to really be able to explain just what the heck was going on. So you have to admit that that was probably a little terrifying. Now, the climate change and the weird colors of the sun and all the clouds and everything that was going on made people think that the apocalypse was about to happen. And as you can imagine, they were probably a little concerned about that. But for 5 young people, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, the soon-to-be Mary Shelley, Claire Clairmont, and Dr. John Paul Dorey, the eruption of the Mount Tambora in 1815 proved to be a pivotal point in all their lives. Lord Byron had rented a beautiful house on the shores of Lake Geneva, known as Villa Diodati. And Byron and his buddies were planning to have a nice summer on the lake. However, the weather was so miserable. It was cold, it was dark and rainy, and Mary Shelley wrote that it was a wet, ungenial summer, and incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. Now, I don't know about you, but I can think of worse places to be stuck in than a mansion overlooking Lake Geneva. But I digress. Now, because they were stuck indoors, they were bored, and Lord Byron had been reading some ghost stories, and he got the idea to throw the challenge out there to the rest of them to write their own ghost story. Now, Mary Shelley did write Frankenstein, and Lord Byron did pen a fantastically dark and dismal poem that he aptly titled Darkness. Now, there were some other things going on in that house besides writing, if you know what I mean. And if you don't, and even if you do, be on the lookout for the next episode if you want to find out all the details. But first, make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on History by the Book. Bye-bye.